I think one of the biggest problems that India faces today is, of course, we are in the midst of a terrible agrarian crisis. But that emanates from the entire economic situation going wrong. One has always been wondering why is it that although farmers, the number of people who commit suicide is as big as 300,000 in the last 17 years or so. Every hour we have reports that two farmers commit suicide in India. And yet, nothing tangible has been done to see that this particular cycle of distress is reversed. One has always been thinking, why is it so? But what I realize is that this is primarily a part of a bigger design. A bigger design which is aimed at actually moving the rural population out of rural areas into the urban areas. So it fits in very well with that kind of economic thinking. Why I'm saying so? In 1996, I still remember the year, there was a conference at the MS Swaminathan Foundation in Chennai. In that conference, the then Vice President Sustainable Development of the World Bank, who by virtue of his being the Vice President for Sustainable Development also would be occupying the post of Chairman of CGIAR, which is the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research, the body that governs the 16 international research centers in different countries. The gentleman's name was Dr. Ismail Sarageldin. Ismail Sarageldin made a statement, and I still recall. He said that the number of people who are going to migrate from the rural areas in India to the urban areas by the year 2015, which means in the next 20 years, would be equal to twice the combined population of UK, France and Germany. The combined population of UK, France and Germany is 200 million. So the World Bank had actually predicted in 1996 that 400 million people would be moving out of rural areas into the urban areas by the year 2015. Now, I had thought actually it was a warning. All these years, for quite a number of years, I believe that the World Bank had warned us to be, really watchful of this kind of migration, or this extent of migration, because 400 million is more than the population of America. So imagine what the situation would be, that kind of a demographic shift taking place in India. Now we are close to 2015, or just almost there. And I realize now that the World Bank actually was not warning us. It actually was telling us to do this. Because subsequently, if you see the World Development Reports, and I remember one particular report of 2008 World Development Report, it said that you haven't done what you're supposed to do. So you must now hasten the process. So how do you hasten the process? You go in for land rentals, which means the land is an asset which according to World Bank is in the hands of people who are inefficient producers, which are the farmers. So you must take the land from them by acquisitions or by lease or whatever, hand it over to the industry to operate and move this population out of agriculture. And also they suggested that since the younger people in agriculture do not know anything else to do except for farming, so their suggestion was that for the younger people who have to move into the urban areas, you must launch a program of skill development, and which would mean that India should set up a network of industrial training institutes where these fellows are trained to become industrial workers. Now, this was in 2008 World Development Report. Strangely, we wouldn't perhaps be able to see the connection, but strangely I found that in 2009, when Chidambaram at that time was the finance minister, the finance minister in that budget in 2009, before going for the elections, he actually made a provision for setting up 1,000 industrial training institutes in India. Look at it, the World Bank advised us, we followed the World Bank prescription. Today, I realize that the skill development program has grown so big that what the World Bank had said was that 400 million people by 2015 would be in the urban areas. So keeping that in mind, the skill development program today is aiming at training or improving the skills of 520 million people by the year 2018. So you add additional population for 3 years. So 520 million people. And if you look into the what exactly they are training people for, that is where the entire picture comes into your mind, or the reality comes into your mind clear before you, is that they are actually telling us now we have to train auto rickshaw drivers, we have to train the daily wage workers in the companies, maybe security guards and so on. Oh my God, if this is the kind of population shift that is going to be part of the economic growth that we talked about, just imagine these people are being taken out of a kind of a job which would have kept them engaged or sustainable, I would say, and then moving out to a kind of a job which is completely unsustainable and is basically almost like a daily wage worker. So I don't know how it is going to be gainful employment for those people who are being pushed out of agriculture. But that's a different issue. But more important issue is that the population shift is part of the bigger design. It's very clear because the mainline economic thinking, the orthodox economic thinking of the textbooks actually tell us that if you have to grow exponentially, there's no other way unless you move your people out of agriculture into the urban areas. It is part of that. If your GDP has to grow, it cannot grow from agriculture. So you have to move these people out of agriculture, minimize agriculture, the population in agriculture, and then only your GDP can grow vertically. So that is what happened in America. That's what is happening in the European Union. So that's what they plan to do in India also, and also countries like China and other developing world. So this is part of the economic thinking, that agriculture, people have to be moved out of agriculture, and agriculture has to be handed back to, not back, but I would say agriculture has to be handed to the industries because they can produce food now. So that's why corporate agriculture is coming into place, and that is why if you just put all this together, you realize, see, the World Bank had told us in 1996, and then came at the same time the World Trade Organization into 1995. What is World Trade Organization? Basically, they introduced agriculture into WTO for the first time, and the idea was to make trade benefit agriculture. No, in reality, they were trying to address the problem of overproduction of agriculture in America and European Union, because both these blocks were overladen with food. So they had to find a market for it, and the market was developing world. So they made us reduce our tariffs. The cheaper imports will come in. And then we were told that we will be able to export our cheaper food, and that would mean, or cheaper agriculture produced, and that would mean that farmers would gain economically. It didn't happen. My own studies, if you have seen my study on the first 10 years of agreement on agriculture in WTO, it tells us very clearly that in the first 10 years, and prior to that period when the structural adjustment program had begun, the IMF and World Bank's program, let's say in the last 25 years, or including the first 10 years of WTO, there are, I think, 149 countries globally which are dubbed as third world countries. So in my analysis, I have shown that 105 of these developing countries, third world countries, had actually become food importing countries. And I am sure by the time the Doha development round finishes, by and large, almost the entire third world would be, recipient of food. So we are standing with the begging bowl always, and then the rich part of the world would be providing us food. So therefore, now we are going to strengthen that divide of north and south. The north would be the food carrier. The south would always be standing with the begging bowl. And this is happening simultaneously with the effort to move people out of agriculture. So I think the picture is very clear. First of all, I think let's be very clear that the corporate kind of agriculture that will come into the country, will that be beneficial in the long run? A, is that what India requires? B, and what will happen to the kind of the impact on food security, the kind of impact that we are going to witness on the environment, and so on and so forth. So I think these are issues which in any case should have been debated and deliberated in this country before we move into the kind of push that we are witnessing for bringing in corporate agriculture in India. And the FDI in retail, the entire debate in FDI retail, actually, without saying, is actually trying to ensure that the marketing is provided by the FDI retail, so that the corporate agriculture not only comes here to farm, right from the seed, or from the farm to the fork is the entire chain that will be taken care of by the corporate. So FDI retail would have very well fitted in the entire, the structure that we were building for corporate agriculture. Contract farming, and then of course the international trade regime, and of course now we have the supermarkets coming in. Now this, leaving aside, if you move on from the other part, what is the way out? I think before that, let's first also see the demographic situation globally. In America today, there is less than 1% of the population which is left in agriculture. These are the family farms. I don't think we'll see a greater reduction in the family farms now existing, which are already existing in America. In Europe, at the same pace, we are seeing farmers, leaving agriculture in America. Every minute, one farmer quits agriculture in European Union. Now, this is despite the massive subsidies being provided to the agriculture and even direct income support being provided to farmers there. Now, in the last few decades or years, we have seen China, the other major player as far as agriculture is concerned, is moving population out of agriculture into the urban areas, and that's become a kind of a model for India to adopt. But somehow I'm very worried about that model. First of all, let's understand what is happening in China. In China, which produces about 500 million tons of food grains from the same kind of area that we have in India, we produce about 250 million tons, they produce 500 million tons. The population is about 200 million more than India. But let's look at what is happening in China. In China, it is expected that by the year 2030, the number of people living in the urban areas would be 70% of the population, which means the villages are becoming empty in China. Now, we are being told that there's an economic growth in China and it's brought in wonders to rural areas. But the reality is, if you look at China Daily tells us that every year 280,000 people are committing suicide in the rural areas. In India, it has been 17 years since this number has committed suicide. 280,000 roughly is in 17 years in India. In China, every year 208,000 people on average are committing suicide. Out of which, according to the China Daily, 80% of those who commit suicide are committing suicide because of the land issue. So the kind of land acquisition that has taken place in China has done the damage there. So I think people don't talk about it here in India. But also look at the other part. Recently, a report has come out by the Chinese government. It has said that 1/5 of the entire agricultural land in China is ecologically devastated. So the fertilizer, the heavy metals in infiltration in the soil is so phenomenal, nothing can be done there. And then on the top of it, the groundwater and the rivers have also got polluted. So China is a classic model of what wrong you can do to agriculture. On top of it, because they can't produce more food, I doubt their statistics. First of all, China has always, been a question mark globally as well as by other international institutions when it comes to their statistics. But if you look at the Chinese picture, I think it is very interesting. China is one of the biggest land grabbers outside China. We know that the kind of agriculture land grab, farmland grab that's called taking place in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, China is spearheading that. China is not only producing food in those countries, which is to be shipped back home, but is also sending its own farmers to farm there. So which means even they have problems of employment. So if China was so good in food security or was taking care of its own food security, I'm sure you'll agree there was no need to grow food outside and ship it back to their country. So China, I think, is a classical case of what can go wrong with agriculture. And unfortunately, fortunately, India is trying to follow that model. Whether that will be good for India or not is something that we must deliberate in this country before we just blindly accept the Chinese model of agriculture. See, yes, agriculture in India is faced with crisis. There is a crisis of sustainability, there is a crisis of economics, and of course, the bigger crisis, of course, is there, including the crisis of environmental, depletion of water, the contamination of soil, and so on and so forth. I think what we have to realize, India has about 600 million farmers. Till recently, every fourth farmer in the world was Indian, but now I think with China's population going down drastically, I think it will be 1/3 farmers would be living in India. Now, moving them out of agriculture and moving them out of agriculture at a time when the world is witnessing jobless growth is going to be more problematic in the years to come, both socioeconomically as well as politically. I don't think that's the way forward for a country like India. It is expected that by 2030, China is going to have 70% people living in the urban areas. In India, it is expected 50% population would be living in the urban areas. But in many states, it will be alarming situation. In Tamil Nadu, for instance, it is expected 70% would be already living in the urban areas by the year 2037. So it's an alarming situation. The villages are becoming empty. You'll have country homes and of course golf courses in those villages areas. But people in flux, the kind of influx that you're going to witness in the urban areas, and plus the new mega cities coming up, or the cities coming up, is maybe because every new city being built would add on to country's GDP. It's very easy to build up GDP like that. But GDP is not a touchstone to development. So in India, what should be the way forward for agriculture? I think is a very big question. In my understanding, I have always been advocating a couple of things that we must follow. First of all, let's not be worried about this 14% share of agriculture in the GDP. This is always said that our share in GDP is declining, so agriculture is not important, although the huge population lives in agriculture. I think we should not worry about this. If you look at United States of America, the share of agriculture in America's GDP is 4%. But that does not mean that America has given up on agriculture. America, in fact, has strengthened all the the fortress again around agriculture so as to check imports coming into America, because they realize that if you don't produce food, you are not politically important or politically I would say sovereign as a nation. So I think they realize that importance. So they are not going to give up on agriculture. So even at 4%, they are not giving up. So I don't think this should deter us that it was just because our share of agriculture in GDP is coming down, so all is lost in agriculture. The second aspect is that moving these people out from rural areas into urban areas and not being able to give them a job, I think is something which we should all be worried about. Look at a recent report coming from CRISIL. CRISIL says that in the last 7 years, 32 million people moved out of agriculture into the urban areas. Just in the last 2 years, in 2010 to 2012, it says that because the growth was at 5%, not going up, so less of job creation, which I don't know how growth is linked to job creation, but they are saying that 15 million people went back to the villages. Now imagine 15 million people, because they were temporary jobs, so they went back to agriculture. I worry because these people must have sold their land and come back to the urban areas. Now when they go back, they are landless, they are perhaps surviving on Manrega. If that is what our aim of growth, so-called growth is, I think it is worrisome. Now in this connection, then what do we need to do? We have 600,000 villages roughly in India, a little more than 600,000 villages. About 500,000 villages out of these produce food. I think what we need to do is to revitalize these villages. When I say revitalize these villages, is to bring in a kind of agriculture which is economically viable and also environmentally sustainable. Now, this can be done. This can be done in a country like India, and also it should be linked to the household food security in a village. So which means, if these 600,000 villages become food secure or self-reliant in that sense, then I think it sows the seed of a new model of development. You don't have to move these people out of agriculture. Let them be there wherever they are. At least ensure that they're gainfully employed. No, I'm not saying that they should not have any support for industrial support or any other new way of really supporting them. All I'm saying is that support can move on into the villages or into the blocks or district to provide them that kind of a support, rather than moving them out and shifting the production centers also into the urban area. That's not the right way. So if we reverse this process, there will be reverse migration, and also at the same time the country would not see the villages becoming empty and the cities, of course, swarming with people. So that, I think, is one way of reversing this entire the World Bank approach, basically aimed at raising the GDP. It's very easy to say that people in India should be able to do something on their own. I'm not denying that they can't do. Please don't misunderstand me. But if the policy thrust is to move these people out of agriculture, how long do you think they can sustain in the kind of agriculture they are doing? Moving from chemical agriculture to non-chemical agriculture or to genetic engineering and so on, is going to sustain them for a few years more, if at all. Eventually they will lose out, because if you look at the kind of economic decline or the income decline that we have witnessed in rural areas, and that is, I consider it as a deliberate effort, because we want to push these people out of agriculture. So they can't survive. Let me give an example. The UNTAD if you look at one of the reports, it tells us that the farm gate price or the output price globally has remained static for last 20 years. If you adjust for inflation, what you are fetching, what a farmer is getting for, let's say, tomato today is exactly what he was getting 20 years back. If you look at an FAO report, FAO tells us that for the last 10 years, the output price has remained static. Now, input prices are zooming, output prices are static. Now, what do you expect the farmers to do? They will eventually commit suicide or move out of agriculture. If you look at India, when the Green Revolution came in the 1966, we were told that, the more you invest in agriculture, the higher is your productivity, the higher will be your income. Now, after 48 years of Green Revolution, today we realize that the average income of a farming family in India is rupees 2,150. This is what the NSSO tells us. This is what the Arjun Sen Gupta committee also tells us. 2,115 is less than $40 a month. Now, if at this particular income level, do you expect the farmer to survive? Farmer means not only one person, I'm talking about this farming family. Every month, if this is the income, the younger people are not going to take up that profession in which the father is unable to earn much. So they are moving out of agriculture in many cases. So look at it, 2,115 is I think is a poverty level kind of a income that we have for the farmers in India. But if you look at Safai Karamcharis, Mayawati, before she left the chief ministership in Uttar Pradesh, she gave a minimum salary of 18,500 rupees per month to the Safai Karamcharis. It is better to become a Safai Karamchari than to be a farmer. Why not? I think if this is what the Annadata is going to get at the end of the day, then I think agriculture has to go out of fashion, and that is what is happening. Today you'll be surprised in India, 60% of those who produce food for the country are going to bed hungry. If that's the situation, you can't hope that these people will have the entrepreneurship ability to really carve out a miracle out of nothing. So all I'm saying is we need policy changes or policy mix to help these farmers. If you can provide 31 lakh crore rupees as a tax concession as part of that revenue foregone in the last 10 years to the corporate sector, which did not result in any jump in industrial production, neither did it create jobs. 31 lakh crore, according to what some economists tell us, if I use those figures, they say that 48,000 crore subsidy in a year is good enough to wipe out poverty in India for 1 year. 31 lakh crores, using the same data, 31 lakh crores could have wiped out poverty for 62 years, which means all times to come. Now, this means the resource allocation has been to a sector which was not utilizing that money in a form that we could have gainfully seen the spread all around. So this money, if it had gone to agriculture, to boost agriculture, you would have seen the miracle. And once agriculture develops, the entire economy will have see the domino effect. So I think it is very important to bring more money into the hands of the people in the rural areas, and this can be done. And I'm not saying that there is one size which fits all, but there could be different ways of doing it in different areas. After all, we have 20 climatic zones as far as agriculture is concerned in this country, and we could have different models or different ways to see how we can make agriculture more productive and sustainably viable, economically viable. There was an advertisement some years back, and if you recall that advertisement, Govinda in one of the advertisement would say, "Jor ka jhatka dheere se." I think the entire economic design is of the same pattern. The moment you withdraw everything from agriculture collapses, but there's a huge population, so the government would also collapse. So they don't want to see that uprising. So they do it very systematically and very in a phased out manner or in a slow manner, so that you feel the impact and gradually you move out of agriculture. Now, the MSP at one time was a very important tool, but I have always questioned the role that MSP played in actually marginalizing farmers, because MSP, minimum support price, that we talk about, benefited only 30% of the farmers. 70% farmers have not been getting any benefit out of MSP because they have nothing to bring to the market. If you look at MSP is operates primarily in the Green Revolution areas. Punjab, Haryana, not even UP in that sense, because Western UP brings the produce to Haryana. Haryana farmers take it to Rajasthan. So there are mandis also in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and so on. But generally, this would be not more than 30% of the country's area. So only in 30% are we trying to buy at a minimum support price from the farmers. 70% is outside the ambit of it. So you can just see, these are the people who are committing suicide, these are people who are in terrible distress and so on and so forth. Now when you want to raise MSP still further, I see this talk of saying that the entire aim should be now to provide 50% profit along with MSP, according to Swaminathan Committee. I don't agree with that, because I think that will be actually widening that gulf, because MSP, as I said, is only given to 30% of the population. So that means the benefit of 50% profit will only go to that population. What about the remaining part of the population, which is huge, 70%? So that's not the way forward. Now, yes, you do provide, like the proverbial balm that we provide when we are having some pain on the, is that we provide these farm loan waivers and so on and so forth. But this is just to try to see that the anger doesn't spill onto the street. But it's not aimed at really addressing the entire issue of agriculture in the long term, so that we bring in a kind of agriculture which is sustainable. I think I'm expecting a kind of agriculture which should be there for the next 50 years. When my children grow up and perhaps their children also grow up, because then who will produce food for them? We are today moving on into a kind of agriculture design or model, whatever you call it, where we are going back to the days of ship-to-mouth existence. There was a time when food in India would come from the ship directly to the hungry mouth. Today we are bringing in all those policies back, which would ensure that we go back to the days of ship-to-mouth existence. We now believe this is economic growth. You can buy food off the shelf. But I don't think anyone has actually, or any economist for that matter, or policymaker, has even visualized the political implications of buying food for a country like India. I think that's where I am reminded of what Jawaharlal Nehru had once said. And that was 1955, when he was speaking from the ramparts of the Red Fort on August 15. He said, "It is very humiliating for any country to import food. So everything else can wait, but not agriculture." Today, we have forgotten the first part of his sentence. And we are merely going on with the second part of the sentence, because we think, "Jog ka jhatka dheere se." So we go on repeating it ad nauseum again and again, but actually trying to see that there is a population shift that takes place, there is land acquisition on a massive scale that takes place. We have 8 lanes, expressways coming up into the areas. Nobody knows why are they coming up, whether they are required or not. But the more roads you build, the more the GDP grows. So building, the GDP grows, and we live in the illusion that as if the nation is growing. See, I think what the government is saying is that somebody will produce food for you. But look at it, a country which has 1.2 billion people today, and if we were to ensure that people don't produce food, food is produced by the corporates. It's like the warning perhaps was sounded by Mahatma Gandhi when he said that a country like India needs a production system by the masses, not production system for the masses. I think this has to be understood. I think Mahatma Gandhi had the foresight to see the crisis coming up in India. And unless we keep this population gainfully employed in a manner that they can take care of their own food security, otherwise we are trying to ensure that the country would always remain dependent upon food security, which I think is not a healthy sign for any country which wants to be a superpower. If you are food insecure, you cannot be economically secure or politically secure in that sense. Having said that, what we need to do is, if you remember, I told you that we need to develop the villages. My concept is that every village or a cluster of villages should operate in a manner in which we can have local production, local procurement, and local distribution. And this is linked to food security. And this was a system prevalent in India before the British came in. In many places in India, it is still there. We have seen a cluster of villages, let's say in the Kalahandi belt of Odisha, which is infamous for starvation and hunger. I've seen villages which have not seen hunger for the last 30 years. These villages survive or live on what is called as food grain banks or sharing and caring system. So, every village is a microcosm of country's polity. So it has landless people, it has people who are landowners, and people who would sell their produce into markets. So these villages are collectively buying the produce from these people who have to sell it in the market at a market price, make a grain bank out of it, and then ask the poor people in the village that whatever you want to come, if you are not food insecure, please come, take your credit. On credit you can take your quota of food, and at the time of employment, at the time of the harvest and so on, you can repay back. And this system has grown in the country. It has not reduced. So why not we can build up this system across the country where every village becomes a village republic. And this is only possible if we bring back the focus on control of natural resources by the village communities, rather than bringing the government or the private sector control it and produce food for the people. See, there's no denying that lifestyle changes are taking place. People do want to live in luxury. And that is what always I'm puzzled, because when I travel into the Western countries, I find the farmers there living in luxury. Whereas the Indian farmers are living in penury, or they are in subsistence farmers in India. Why is it so? And I've often asked this question to the farmer friends in America or Europe, that you guys live in luxury, and then you want the WTO to open up all the trade barriers. So your cheaper food will create more problems for the Indian farmer. They'll be out of agriculture. Is that the model of agriculture you want? And I have often found that they are the ones who understand what it means, because it will hit them also at some stage or the other. So they've been saying, no, I think each country should have its own kind of agriculture protection to ensure that agriculture survives or thrives in a manner that the kind of expectation that younger people have from the way everything is going around them, which is very valid. Now, why it is not happening in those countries? It's very interesting. If you look at the United States of America, and if you look at Europe for that matter, if you look at America, the average, the income, monthly income of a farming family in America is about 100% more than the average income of the area that they live in. It's not because the farmers are very productive there, but because they get direct income support. If you come to a country like Holland, in Holland, the farmers, the average income of farming family is 285% higher than the average income of military. Now, it's again because of subsidies. So the question point I'm trying to convey is, if those people can live in luxury by farming, we can also do it. All I'm saying is the incentives have to come from the government in a manner that the farming becomes a profitable or an economically viable venture. That's what I'm suggesting. So that's why I've been fighting on this premise that a time has come when Indian farmers need assured and guaranteed monthly income every month. And that is what will bail them out. If a chaparasi can get 15,000 rupees per month as his basic salary, if a Safai Karamchari in UP get 18,500, please tell me what crime has the farmer done that he should get 2,000 rupees? Why can't he get 18,500 rupees? If he gets 18,500 rupees, I can tell you his economic condition will improve drastically for the better. So why not do that? And there's nothing wrong. I'm not saying that people should not have that aspiration. But there is a way to do it. Rather than moving out, making them become auto rickshaw driver is not going to bring that kind of economic prosperity that you see, or economic vision of growth is not going to take place per household. That is something which is more worrisome.